Hey folks, we're back at the Open Source Summit in Dublin, and we're here with Eddie Knight, who's the Chief Developer Advocate for Sonatype, and he's also a maintainer of the Finos project. And we're going to be talking about infrastructure as code and the financial services space and how it might be all coming together in new and interesting ways. Eddie, welcome to the show.
I'm really excited to be here. This is awesome. And it's also a good break from all the talks that have been going on. There's just like information overload this week.
This is true. So you guys are working on a project that involves setting up some infrastructure as code tools. Is it brand new tooling or is it extensions, specifications that I think will address some of the security concerns people have been having with those tools for the financial services space? What are you guys up to, and will others benefit from this?
Yeah, okay. That's a lot. Yeah. Last one, your last question. Can anybody outside of financial services benefit from this? Yeah, absolutely. So what we're working on is what it looks like to deploy infrastructure inside of a highly regulated environment, right? We're working with feedback that we're getting from financial institutions. So all of our members, we've got a long list of banks that are members and other finance that are involved in the Finos organization, and we're able to take feedback that we're receiving from them, consolidate it into documentation. We're doing a lot of extending beyond just like the CIS standard. And from that, once we have all those definitions in place, we're working with HashiCorp actually to create a lot of Terraform modules. And we're working with Red Hat to do a lot of configurations that are making things available in that locked down way that is ready to use, or at least a lot closer to being ready to use than traditionally when the financial services are trying to deploy infrastructure.
One of the dirty little secrets of our industry is that a lot of those cloud services are misconfigured because people are using these tools and they don't really know much about security. It was kind of an elective for most developers, and they generally didn't take that elective. So, how will we address this issue as we go forward, and how easy will it get to fix this problem?
Yeah, so I feel like you're kind of referencing the shared responsibility model with the cloud providers, right? It's not their responsibility or legal obligation to provide something that's totally locked down, right? It needs to be configured. It needs to be customized, extended. You need to know what you're doing to lock it down, and they're going to keep their stuff secure. You need to keep your stuff secure, even though it's on their system. They're not responsible for it. And the problem that comes in, which is what you just mentioned, is that a lot of us, so I came from front-end development, and then I went into back-end development, then I went into auto engineering before going into like SRE and DevOps. And along that way, at no point did anybody sit me down and say, this is the right way to secure everything. And so there have probably been times where I was like, that's safe enough, that's secure enough, right? Ship it. Mm-hmm. But inside of the financial services organizations, that doesn't fly, right? Mm-hmm. We need to do a lot more work, a lot more regimentation. And that's why we have these like miracles to get 30 days. Like, oh my gosh, you deployed something in 30 days. Like, that's amazing, right? It usually takes like 3 months, 6 months. It's like, well, no, like some of us are getting it down pretty low to where once everything's finished, 30 days later, we can deploy it. It's like, that's really slow. It's outside in like the Ubers of the world, right? These are really slow deployments because there's so many boxes that we have to check. There's so many conversations we have to have. I have to explain it not just to my peers and my colleagues, but I have to like write an entire document and submit it and get it reviewed by other people in the organization that I've never met before. And they need to look through that and say, yes, I agree with you that that's a good way to secure it. So what we're working on inside of Finos is trying to streamline that, get stuff that can be put into the financial service registry that will cut some of those corners. So you don't need to explain it anymore because you're using 90% of it is coming from a boilerplate and kind of closing that gap, reducing that time.
That almost sounds like I've been driving at 25 miles an hour and now I'm up to 40 and I'm going wicked fast.
Wicked fast. Yeah, just like, oh my gosh, I'm going 40 miles an hour. Yeah, that's right. You nailed it.
As we go along, we hear a lot about shifting security responsibility further left, but we also have SREs. And the question I've always had is, how far left do we shift security versus do we get like security engineers who do that function the same way SREs do that function, and maybe they take care of the security issue on behalf of the developers.
Oh man, nobody's ever going to agree on that, right? So whatever I say, sure the audience is going to come in and be like, "Well, no, think about it this, think about it that." But from my take, we have really, really skilled, intelligent, well-intentioned folks in the security and architecture spaces that are very keenly aware of the requirements. And we have our developers and our infrastructure engineers that are really, really keen on how to provide those things. And bridging that gap doesn't necessarily just mean grabbing somebody from a team and saying, okay, well, you do that other job now. It has to start with the communication lines. It has to start with just not scheduling meetings, but overlapping the workflows and just creating opportunities where both teams can say, hey, I am familiar with that, let me pick up that part. Not just like, hey, security, you need to come learn infrastructure deployments. Like, I don't know that giving other people other jobs is necessarily the solution. I would say communication and overlap is the solution. That's my take on it.
What is the state of the relationship between the security people in the financial services space and the developers? Because historically, there's not been a lot of love lost between the two. The security guys kind of look at the developers and go, you know, you're kind of the root cause of all my problems. And
then the other way, right? Yeah. I've been in conversations where, and you know what? Let me just say me. I've been guilty of sitting there and being like, these incompetent fools. Right? On both sides of the table. I've been on the side where I'm sitting there as an infrastructure, like SRE focus, in with the security guys, and we're looking at what's coming from app dev, and we're just like, these incompetent fools, right? And then I've been in conversations like with other app devs, and we're trying to deploy something, we're trying to ship something, and we get some pushback where they're like, no, you can't do that until you get your VPC configured like this, and we're just like, these incompetent fools, right? And so there's a lot of that, of just like the other guy is the stupid one, and that's where I say we need to overlap the communication. I think that's happening. I think we're getting closer to that. We're getting a lot more into the places where the big institutions are learning, like, we need to open up those lines of communication, and it's because we're at a point in history where leadership is becoming familiar with the fact that they have competent employees. That Steve Jobs quote of, I'm not even going to get the quote right, but we don't hire smart people to tell them what to do. We hire smart people and get out of their way, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I think that I've seen more and more bank leadership understanding this concept of, like, I hired these people for a reason, so I'm going to kind of just clear the obstacles for them. Is that universal? No. Is that the norm? Maybe I'm too optimistic in saying so, but I think we're getting closer to where we're trusting the professionals to have the right conversations, to bring the right information to the table, and I think it's coming a long way.
Is there a smart way about doing that, or should I just take them all and throw them in a room and lock the door and see what happens?
Yeah, please. Yeah. Bring them off when you come back.
But you don't think the security people should learn how to program per se? It doesn't sound like that.
Those conversations are happening.
Okay.
I would not be an advocate for that necessarily. I think that when you come into programming from a security mindset, you're going to be a lot more focused on scripts. When you come from an app dev mindset, you're going to be focused a lot more on objects and systems, right? And both of those have their place, but just asking the security guys to just suddenly one day wake up and start writing code the way that app dev does, the way that infrastructure does, it's going to be really hard. It's going to be a really big shift. And so what I would say is, like, bring those skills to the table and bring the object-oriented programming, the like really in-depth knowledge that different industry professionals have related to programming, bring that to the table, and then have the solutions come from this table where we have these shared goals and diverse skills.
We talked about the shared responsibility model. Is there more that the cloud service providers could be doing to help this whole conversation along?
So we're seeing a lot coming out of the cloud service providers on just being aware of how much work is necessary for the financial institutions. Inside Finos, Google's a member. AWS has come out and contributed to some stuff on occasion, and actually I'm not sure about their member status, so don't quote me on that. Sorry about that. But we have seen them like actually wanting to engage with the community, and there's this awareness that it's been really difficult for the financial institutions to use their tools. Like, hey, we're making this available to you, you configure it, and then they just keep getting phone calls, keep getting phone calls, keep getting phone calls. And I think that awareness is manifesting in steps being taken to streamline stuff, steps being taken to automate stuff, looking for tools, looking for solutions. We're not across the bridge yet, but I think that the cloud service providers, especially the two that I mentioned, have started on the bridge. They're like, hey, we need to be going in this direction. We need to be shifting things. And Red Hat is a huge contributor in our community, because Ansible is a huge infrastructure automation. I mentioned HashiCorp with Terraform a minute ago. Red Hat with Ansible is also a big part of the work that we're doing right now. And so they're showing up, and they're trying to really streamline that process. But we're definitely not across the bridge. There's a lot more work that needs to be done from all sides.
So the bad guys are getting really good at using penetration testing tools to find these misconfigurations. So how long a journey are we on, and when can people think about maybe closing this gap?
Yeah, when it comes to penetration as we're familiar with it, I think that, that's never going to stop, right? We're always going to be there, but there is a degree to which that's not what's causing the fire drills, right? That's not what's, Log4j is why nobody got a Christmas break, because the Log4j had a vulnerability and nobody could keep track of where they'd installed Log4j, and so they needed to go in and find every single place. Where have I installed Log4j across my entire organization, and how do I get it updated? I think inside the US, 90% of financial services have updated all of their Log4j installs from vulnerability, but 100% are saying that they're done with it. So there's a gap there. Somebody, like one of you guys, is not telling the truth, or you're just not aware of a few of the installs. Total, so Sonatype manages Maven Central. We can actually see the downloads. And after everybody said, like, yeah, the Log4j incident's done, still 40% of installs are from the vulnerable version of Log4j, which is a supply chain vulnerability. That means that if you are using software, if you've installed Log4j, then any script kiddie with instructions from a blog can come and exploit your software. All that has to be true is that they have those instructions, they're targeting you, and you use Log4j, and you're toast. That's a really big deal, right? And so that's why all week we've been hearing about the supply chain. So traditional penetration is absolutely something that we need to be aware of, but I think we also have a lot of skills in that area. A lot of people are coming to the table with an awareness of how to respond to these things. Whereas the supply chain dependency is a relatively new topic. It's like really skyrocketed over the last 2 years. Sonatype's been doing it for 15 years. We've got a whole software suite on that. I'm not going to go into that, but it's the topic right now. It's the hot topic. That's the thing that is going to be causing a lot of the gaps that need to be closed. Infrastructure as code is where you come in and prevent a lot of those gaps. And so that's why inside of CFI, inside of Finos, it's really exciting to be able to be setting stuff up that can be consumed by the financial services. So that way, when they're consuming this, we can kind of help prevent those vulnerabilities, those supply chain attacks that are happening from bleeding in and causing those gaps inside the banks.
Do you think that the regulators at the SEC and places like that are starting to understand the issue about the software supply chain, and they're going to start showing up asking some rather pointed questions?
So, yes, especially after Equifax, because that was just like a blatant, like, huge issue that was like, you didn't update Apache struts, right? Like you didn't update struts, and now everybody's social security number just got released. That's a huge issue because you didn't update your software. There is a known vulnerability. You didn't know that you had that vulnerability because you didn't do the diligence to track it, and so then you didn't do the update, and now the entire country is just like in upheaval. Like everybody's freaking out. So after that, there was this fine of like, what was it, $700 million? Don't quote me on that. Billion, I don't know. It was a number far larger than I can imagine. And in the aftermath of that, the regulators said, we will use the full force of the law to pursue anything like this in the future. And so there's like this warning that's like, hey, if this happens again, like you guys, like we will burn you to the ground, is the message that's coming in. And then the White House comes in and says, hey, supply chain security is extremely important. You need to have your software bill of materials if you're doing any federal contracts inside the United States. Obviously, we're in Europe, so probably should be thinking out beyond that. But that's the experience that I have. Yeah, a lot of the regulation is starting to shape up in the area of like, okay, we've talked about the penetration stuff, we talked about your firewall and your network and everything else, but now we need to start talking about your supply chain and securing your software supply chain.
All right, so we're at the point where this has become an issue you can't ignore. The developers themselves, they still seem to think that somebody's magically going to take care of all this stuff for them in the platform somewhere. So what's your best advice to those folks about how to get engaged with this and start thinking about it so that, you know, you're not the last kid on the block upgrading your Log4j instance?
Yeah, definitely. I think just being aware of the topic, what conversations are happening in the topic. There's a lot of tools. Like I said, in the last 2 years, this has become all the hotness, right? A lot of innovation is happening in this space. Be aware of that. The Linux Foundation has some trainings on like what is an SBOM, why do I need an SBOM. Some tools are coming up recently. We've got a free tool that you can use to generate an SBOM on a GitHub. It's called Lift. So there's some tools that are out there. There's a lot of really good competitors to ours that are addressing this space. So there's just options galore. What I would personally advise against is homebrewed solutions for this, specifically in the area of identifying vulnerabilities, because this is something that we've seen happen is that Equifax thought that they secured it. They thought that they had it good, but they didn't have a research arm. And so you're going to need to be working with somebody who has a research arm that can actually be in front of this stuff instead of asking Alex in the other cubicle, like, hey, how are our CVEs? Like, what's the dashboard looking like this week? We can't just be like relying on the SOC to update us when this kind of stuff happens. We need to have some more security tooling that's actually integrated into the entire development lifecycle be happening. And
so the SBOM is essentially the equivalent of a list of ingredients that are in my product or whatever, and people can look at that and say, oh, well, I don't want to consume that, or that's not good for me because I have an allergy.
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy. Yeah.
And it's the kind of that process. But so I get all this data from all these people, and it comes up in this SBOM, and then I stick it in a repository and I check the box. Now what? What am I supposed to do with all this stuff?
Yeah. As a developer, to you, like, your job's done. The SBOM is a communication tool. Now the organization, the system that you operate in, needs to communicate with that. We need to get it integrated into other tools that are actually going to say, like, okay, based on what you're telling me, this is how we're going to respond. We're going to red light, green light, yellow light based on what we're seeing in here. If you only ship it at the build stage, like, you're going to check that federal box for the US. But I think that if you want to get ahead of these international regulatory standards and actually take, like, make full use of the knowledge that's out there, the experience that we've been gaining over the years, that the industry has been gaining, then you need to be integrating your SBOM, your bill of materials, and other tooling, like through your entire life cycle. You need to be, so if you can get something in your IDE, so that way your developers, when they're coding, can be aware of the best practices, like, oh, I'm importing something as a known vulnerability. If you can get something at the pull request stage, like, oh, cool, I auto-generated my SBOM, so when I changed my code, the SBOM is getting updated, right? Just integrating it at every single, and then obviously build and release that's the big one, right? We need to have the SBOM when we're releasing it, but there's there's different places where this needs to be integrated. I'm sorry if I lost track of your question there.
No worries, no worries. Hey guys, first, basically we're about to play a giant game of red light, green light, 1, 2, 3. Eddie, thanks for being on the show.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
All right. And guys, we'll be back in a few minutes.